I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and I'm approaching retirement. It kind of doesn't matter. And a lot of the things you worried about, you can adapt to. You can find ways of being who you are, and you get out of it what you want. But I was clearly the guy who was assigned to that role at that time, probably for other reasons. Almost all the Asian people I've worked with lack confidence. I don't know why. The only things you should apologize for are the things that everybody knows you're not responsible for. You mustn't ever think that I'm on somebody else's turf. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. And I've traveled all over the world. That's one thing I can say for sure. Is I've been everywhere. If something means something to you, if something's important to you, you've got to defend that. You've got to be willing to talk about that.
Thank you everyone for joining us on another episode of Rice Among Potatoes. So today we have 3 rices.
2.5, I'd like to say.
Okay, 2.5. So we have Jan with us today. So he is quite a big boss.
No, I'm not. Surely that makes me sound really oppressive.
So rather than me butchering your introduction, so why don't you introduce yourself and then tell us kind of your experience.
Sounds good. Okay, so I'm I guess halfway in this whole rice potatoes world. Half of me is definitely potatoes, and half of me is definitely rice. So my mum's Danish, or was Danish, and my dad is Chinese from Singapore. So a real mix. A lot of people assumed that I was, English maybe, but I've always been the wrong person in the wrong place all the time, which is a weird feeling. I know it's not exactly the same as your own situations, but I was born here in the UK, but I grew up in Houston, in Texas, and there I was very much an outsider because I was, slightly Asian. They could probably pick up on that when I was a kid. I remember my mum being asked, "Where do you get them from?" Because myself and my sister looked a bit Asian, and she assumed at the time when there was a lot of trouble in Vietnam that we were Vietnamese or maybe even half Vietnamese. And she just said, "No, they're mine." And the lady said, "Yeah, I know they're yours. I know they're yours. I'm just asking, how do you get hold of one of these people? Or how do you manage to..."
So they assume you were adopted?
They assumed I was adopted as a Vietnamese, possibly a boat person or something like that, effectively, at the time. I'm not entirely sure whether that's the appropriate politically correct way of referring to it, but that was certainly what she felt when she was asking the question from my mum. So that was very strange. And I grew up there, and I hadn't really talked before then, so I grew up as a child there, and I gained an American accent. And after we came back to the UK at the start of my schooling, I had a very strong Texan accent, one I don't have now, as you can tell. I've managed to lose that. In fact, I lost it within 1 year because when you're a kid, you adopt languages very quickly, but also the peer pressure. So I basically stopped talking for about a year.
Oh, wow. So how old were you when you went over to Houston then?
So I was about 3 when I went to Houston, and I came back when I was about 6 or 7. Okay. And quite a weird feeling. People used to make fun of me because of my American accent. Then later on, they'd make fun of me because I was a bit Chinese and various different nicknames and things like that. Yeah. So that was always a little bit frustrating, but it probably gave me some of the same sort of concerns or issues that you guys have been talking about on the podcast. Clearly been listening to some of the previous episodes, and I can relate to a lot of that. But I was always in the wrong place because there is no magical place where Yans live, where we're all identical. I've met various people who are half Asian, half white, and there's a sort of a connection there, but they've always been different, like maybe Vietnamese French or Filipino English, all sorts of combinations, which I can relate to, I can associate with them, but they're still a little different. I used to joke about it like the Kung Fu Panda episode, when he goes to this valley and everybody is who he is, and he can relate to that, and he's suddenly found home or something like that. I'm sure the episode is a little bit different from that, but that hasn't really ever happened because there is nobody that's sort of half this, half that. But
So I think in Japan they actually call this hafu, so literally half. And there is quite a big, I think, sort of internet following for people of a similar upbringing or ancestry, where it's sort of they're half Japanese and half not, and it's quite difficult for them, whether it's in Japan or outside Japan. Probably similar to some of the things you felt.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty relaxed about it because it's the way I live. But I've noticed at certain times I'm the Asian person in the room. Less so now. I seem to have matured into this sort of half and half. And I think, thankfully, as well, there's a lot more mixing in the UK than there are in probably other countries, and you get a much more sort of normal sense that this is just a person. It doesn't really matter who they are or where they're from. But when I went out to work in Singapore and Indonesia later on, I definitely got the sense that I was an expat, because some places you're the immigrant, some place you're the expat, and some place you're at home but nobody quite understands who you are, and so maybe you're slightly out of your territory, out of your whatever the comfort place is. But I think London's pretty flexible and pretty accommodating, so I've certainly never had an issue with that since I've grown up, started working and got into that London sort of vibe.
So when you came back to the UK at 6 then, so did you stay in the UK then until...
Sorry, I didn't to interrupt you there, but I've been very lucky to have worked all around the world, literally all the continents. Yeah. So I've spent time in Eastern Europe, the whole of Europe, Asia, lots of different countries. So Singapore, Indonesia, Japan, Thailand, South Korea for a few months. Fascinating culture there, and again, I wasn't South Korean, and there's bits of things I could relate to, and I love the food and love all of the bits of South Korean culture. I spent a lot of time learning Taekwondo when I was a kid. There's probably a whole conversation there about martial arts and being part Asian and wanting to sort of fit the Jackie Chan character that has a similarity with my name.
Have you ever been called Jackie Chan?
Of course I have. Yes.
I've definitely been called Jackie Chan.
That's a badge of honor.
Yeah, it's a badge of honor. You look Asian, right?
Yeah.
You look Chinese, but also and I've had it said to me that you look quite like a Chinese superstar, film star.
An actual film star who happened to look like.
Yeah.
I'd find that hard to believe. I feel very sad for that person.
Well, I think they should be honoured that they look like you. I think it's Wu Yanzu, if you know who that is.
I have to Google that later.
Okay.
Yeah. I know I've got the same name as a Korean tennis player. Sadly, it's a lady rather than a gentleman, but I'll take that. But, and there's a bit of a weird one where I've got a girl's name, my name's spelt Jan, much more like Janet or something like that, which has caused me even more problems. And I've got a first name, which I won't even go into, which is also feminine sounding. So I've had to live with a lot of that. But the martial arts thing taught me Korean, or some basic words in Korean. I can't claim to speak Korean properly, but I've always had a strange connection there, but I'm not in any way Korean.
You're very sort of diverse, more diverse than Yunan and I. So if someone asks, who is Yan Chan? What would your answer be?
Yeah, is a child of the world or something like that, where I've just been connected with everything. I've been to all the continents. I've been able to work there as well, which gives you a different view on the whole world. Whether it's sort of Asia or Ethiopia, where I was very lucky to work for a couple of months. The US, going back as more of a professional than when I was there in kindergarten, and South America, which again is completely different altogether, Brazil and Mexico and various other countries. So you do get a completely different view of it when you're there as a child. I've been to Singapore a lot as a child, but also there as a professional, and in the US as a child versus the US as a professional. And you do get a completely different understanding of the culture, and you get treated differently as well. Yeah. So I think that's very interesting. But it's a lot of it was when I was growing up. That was probably the main frustration, I'd say, probably.
So if you go back to you growing up then, and your frustrations, do you have any vivid memories of, do you know what, this was a pivotal moment in life where I realised I am Yan Chan, the worldly person? Or
no, I don't.
Any particular memories that stick in your mind?
I don't think there's any one point that sort of changes your life in that way. I think it's always changing. I mean, you can feel it now as well when you change as a person. I mean, as much as anything else, I think it's about who you are and who you decide to be that day. And you can be different. You can change, and you can choose to move your career in a different way. And I think that's really important, to accept who you are and accept that you're not this type of person that you thought you wanted to be, I think is really important. So understanding what you want out of life and understanding how you fit in and whether you want to change who you are. There's a bit of accepting it. Maybe this is who I am. Maybe I'm the Chinese guy in the room who's good at maths. Turns out I'm actually not that good at maths, but they'll assume I am. I've had that in a project in Ireland when I was there, and they said, look, I'm going to jump to the assumption that you're the modeler and you're the guy who's in charge. And I was like, yeah, I'm the modeler, But was I actually better at maths? Probably not, but I was clearly the guy who was assigned to that role at that time, probably for other reasons. Again, maybe the same thing.
And really interesting, you talk about being confident and accepting who you are. So in your life, when do you think, can you relate to a point in time where you accepted yourself? Because you've been referred to as all type of...
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and I'm approaching retirement soon. Not quite
Still
retirement,
not right?
But
for people like us then, who obviously we've got foot in different camps of you more than us. Do we ever really find who we are then, or are we just going through constantly being slightly different people just because of one, where we're living, and two, at what stage of life we are? Because, for instance, someone at their early stage of the career might be very different to, someone who's close to retiring.
Yeah, I think I've been the troublemaker in parts of my career. I've been sort of, I hope so. I don't want to ever get boring, but I think you go through an early stage where you want to be accepted by the group around you. You do everything you can to try and be the person that you've been told you need to be, and you put on this veneer of perfection, and you try and keep everything neat and tidy. Especially being part Asian, I suppose, is that expectation that's who you are, so you can have to fill that character. And then when you feel like you're in a place where you can be trusted for the capability and the skills and the things you bring, the experience you've got now, you then change, I think, as a person. You become more demanding. You start to expect things, and then eventually you start to become a little bit frustrated by the situation. You may send an email in a hurry, which I always recommend. Send the email to yourself, read it in the morning, and find out later whether you've made a mistake or not. And you can always find a better way of saying that email, but don't send emails when you're angry, is a good piece of advice anyway. But I would say once you've got to that stage when you've got a bit frustrated, you'll typically dial it down and understand how you can get what you need without having to shout, without having to send the angry emails. And you end up finding ways that you can perhaps work with the system, or maybe even manipulate the system, depending on what sort of role you have. And then later on, you realize that whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and needing, to have food or shelter or whatever it is that you need, and then slowly get recognition from your peers, and then start to rise up to get power amongst your peers. And eventually you end up that self-actualization in theory, where you get to the point you realize it kind of doesn't matter. And a lot of the things you worried about, you can adapt to. You can find ways of being who you are, and you get out of it what you want, and then you've succeeded. Now, it may be that some people will never get to that. They'll always feel this frustration. They'll always feel they're not able to achieve the things that they wanted in life. But I do think we need to stop and think about, what is it we really want out of life? What do we, what is our goal? And is enough good enough? And I think that's an important thing, is to understand whether it's enough. Some people will always strive for whether it's money, power, or something else. But I do think there's a certain acceptance. We get to a certain age where you realize, it's not that bad. I'm not getting mistreated by anybody. I'm not getting, too badly treated by people on account of my race or mixed race or what have you. And I think it still happens. I think I'm still prejudiced in a way by people looking at me and thinking they know me, whether it's youthful Asian looks, I don't know, whether that guy seems a lot younger than he is. I make a point every time of talking about 3 decades of work experience or whatever, or referring to something about, one of my roles or something like that. And I use that as a bit of a weapon. I sometimes refer to, my outside of my life and, my kids and things like that as a demonstration for my age. And they'll say something, you don't look old enough to have had those kids. But I use that. I use that as a way to assert my age, to demonstrate my experience, to get over the fact that they sometimes may underestimate me. And the same is probably true of yourselves.
What I'm getting from it is, the more experience you get, the more comfortable you are within yourself, and the more confidence you gain. How do we go about finding that? Because I might be chasing money, but then realize, do you know what? I've been chasing money all my life, but that's not what makes me happy. So what's the advice that you'd give to someone looking for their why and their purpose?
Almost all the Asian people I've worked with lack confidence. I don't know why. I've got no idea. And that extends to many different ethnic groups as well. So it's not just, Chinese or, Koreans or Thai or whoever. I think there is definitely something there. Asian Indians as well seem to also sometimes struggle. I think every now and again you meet one of those who's a little bit more confident, a little bit more settled. Perhaps it's because they've been in the UK for longer. I'm not sure, but I do certainly see that confidence is a major issue, and it holds people back. And I think if you can treat the world as a little bit less important and start worrying less about the way you're perceived and practice being confident, you can get a lot further with that. I do think it's really important to practice. And I often say it like, it's sort of like, nobody would bang the table like that, but that's how I want to show you how to do it. And when you do it, you instantly get a response from the people that you're around. You can talk about it as if you're just demonstrating a role play of banging the table. And if you describe that, all of a sudden everybody in the room treats you with that tiny little bit more respect.
Almost faking confidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not necessarily as confident, but in order to compete in this society, I have to put on an air of confidence that might not be really there, but I have to put it on in order to compete and to be successful. One thing I've started doing less this year is I've stopped apologizing in my emails. I've stopped saying I'm sorry. I've stopped starting emails with I apologize. I've just gone straight to the point and said, this is what we need. Because I feel in many cases, starting off with an apology puts you on the back foot. Yeah. And it's something which always betrayed a lack of confidence in me. And that's something I've done myself to try to move on from that. And I feel like, Jan, you're talking very much to the same point here.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. The only things you should apologize for are the things that everybody knows you're not responsible for. And that is almost the opposite. It's almost a weapon to say to somebody else that they need to take responsibility for this. So you say, I apologize for the fact that we haven't been able to do this and that. And everybody in the room knows the reason is because somebody else, and that makes your apology into something, I don't know, useful to you. I don't mean to be Machiavellian about the whole thing, because you have to be careful about, you don't want to be insincere, or I'm not sure what the right word is there, but not authentically you. You want to maintain your values and everything, but you do need to understand how you're perceived. And a lot of that is things like practicing public speaking, practicing being in difficult rooms and address a topic or ask a question. One of the other things we always talk about is you have to, if you've been invited to a meeting or you're in a discussion with important people and you're worried about that, you have to ask a question. Because if you don't, you'll end up being silent throughout the whole thing. And I think that's really important in terms of getting that experience. The more you can get that experience, then you can hold back and not ask the question until you want to make some impact into that room. But we talk about other things when I talk to some of the teams and some of the people I've worked with as a mentor. In fact, I think I used to be your mentor at some point. Yes. But I think it's really important to understand how things are perceived. Like, for example, the way Yunan's sitting on the edge of the chair there, is that a distancing himself from me? If I lean forwards and I sort of get in your face a little bit, it's a very different experience than if I'm sitting back here. I could be relaxed or I could be timid. I could be like this and having body language almost to protect myself. And when you're feeling comfortable and you can naturally lean forward or naturally change your position or choose the seat when you come in the room, that's really important. You want to be sat in the middle, in the control. You can find ways to not even need to appear to be confident, but by physically being there, you're demonstrating confidence as well. And I think this is one of the most important things we can do as an individual to really overcome some of these challenges. And maybe they're things that we are doing ourselves without noticing it. We're falling into the pattern. We are being perceived as the Asian guy in the room, so I've got to change that. And I'll sit in a position of power. I will lean forward. I'll bang the table. I'll say, what we've got to do when we meet with the client or the customer is we're going to go like this. We are going to make this deal happen, or say something like this. And I want all of you in the room to think about that. And they just think, wow, everybody in the room thinks this guy's got power. How did that come from just making a bit of noise? And you don't even have to do it in the room, but everybody now will see you as an important person when you go into the client conversation, or go into the interview, or go into the whatever it is that you want to do, salary negotiation, or whatever it is that you want to do. But by practicing those sort of things and almost experimenting with them in a way where you describe it, you're not even banging the table when it comes to it. You're just asserting your authority during the conversation beforehand, or amongst your peers or amongst your friends. You can get yourself into a position where you're confident. You go into the room, you don't have to bang any tables. You don't have to lean forwards and appear intimidating. You don't even have to change the seating. You're just feeling more naturally you, and you're talking about things in the way you want to.
Is it more like psyching yourself up then?
Yeah, I think so.
Before a meeting?
Yeah.
Like before you get in the ring?
I think there's a bit of that. And if you do it right, you don't have to. That's the beauty of it. You feel confident anyway. You just need to give yourself the permission to do it.
I've seen you present very confident.
There's still butterflies there sometimes.
So it's good to know that someone who appears confident still has butterflies. So is that your advice then for someone else who maybe feels a lot of those butterflies and thinks, do you know what, like, I'm going to stay on mute on this meeting because there's so many important people?
They need to get over that. They need to practice. And the best way to practice is just to go off mute, or to, in a conversation with somebody who's your boss, who maybe is just walking past you in a corridor or something like that, or maybe not your boss's boss's boss, doesn't really matter. But you want to have that chance to practice, that chance to speak up. And the safest way to do that is in an environment where you've got control, where you've initiated it. And that's by far and away the safest way. Now, when I do public speaking, I did one just the other day, hundreds of people, and I genuinely didn't care about it at all. Absolutely no butterflies. I felt very confident, but that hasn't just come overnight. And I don't even think the people who appear confident when they're young actually have that. I think it's just more a case of, I don't worry too much about what the outcome is. And I've thought about, what's the worst that could happen in this situation? Doesn't really matter. Yeah.
Are you still putting it on then? Or has it now become ingrained in you that, do you know what, like, I don't need to psych myself up. I know I'm going to go into this meeting and smash it.
I don't need to. I know that sounds really aggressive, but honestly, there are very few circumstances, having done so much public speaking as I have, that I feel even remotely concerned about that stuff anymore.
We were speaking about, what's that thing called again? Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Everybody's got imposter syndrome.
So when I was younger, I got imposter syndrome. But now that I'm slightly older, I'm slowly accepting I am who I am.
Yes.
I'm here for a reason. I am not an imposter. Okay, I might not be the same as everyone else, but I'm no imposter. So is that one of the stages that you would go through to get to where you are today then?
You have to go through it. There's no way. If you just jump through it, you will carry that imposter syndrome for longer. You can pretend that everybody's got imposter syndrome. Everybody feels like there's an expert in the room who could, who could prove me wrong or could correct me or something like that. I think there's a Dunning-Kruger and imposter syndrome sort of connection, and I think it's probably amongst us, I'd say, as I'm half of your half of the group.
We claim you
entirely. I'll take that. I think there is a higher degree of that imposter syndrome there, and I think there's a sense of a need to prove ourselves, and we're never good enough. We always have to prove ourselves more. But I think when you get old enough, you do care less about that, and you start to become more ambivalent. And I think that ambivalence sounds wrong because it's like, I don't care. Well, of course I care. I do care. It's just that I don't care so much about the different outcomes, because either of the outcomes or any of the 3 or 5 outcomes, they're all fine, because I've come at it from what I want to get out of it. And I'm comfortable with that. And for some people that might be, I want a promotion, but if I don't get the promotion, I'm also okay with that because I can go elsewhere. Now, that's not going to be everybody. That's going to be quite hard. But if you can get to that stage where you're asking, what's the alternative? I don't want to work these hours, or I don't want to work on this type of project, or I don't want to work with this customer, or whatever it is that they do. I want to be moved to the back of the office, or I want to be moved to the front of the office, or I want to be moved to, to, I don't know, the refund counter, wherever it is. Different people have different things. I've been there myself. I think having that ability to interfere in your progression or interfere in your life and actually assert yourself a little bit is a good, healthy thing. And if you weigh it up, and you have to be honest with yourself, what do I want to get out of this? Am I happy with this? Would I be happy with twice this? If the answer is no, you are in the wrong place. If they paid you twice as much and you'd still be unhappy with your role or whatever, then maybe you need to change who you are, not your job. Or maybe you need to completely change and go find a different career or something like that. So you do have to be honest with yourself. What do I want to get out of this?
So I guess this goes back to what you were saying. Everyone needs to find their why, right?
Yeah.
So I guess as Asians, we're always brought up to, work hard at school, find a good job, money. For me, I'm thinking, do you know what? Yes, money is important for me to survive, but it's not the be all and end all. What advice would you have for someone kind of finding their why? Like, even though that throughout my childhood, I've been told money, 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 because now suddenly to switch to say, do you know what? Actually, it's something else. It's something completely different that I was taught.
A lot of the money thing, I think, is safety, especially initially. You want to have that safety net. You want to know that if you got fired tomorrow, you'd be able to pay your bills and not have to move house and sell your car or whatever else you've got. I think that safety net is really important. So you mustn't allow yourself to dip down below that. But if you're confident in knowing what you're good at and knowing what you're capable of, you have to be self-reflective and say, am I actually good at this job? How would I compare against others? How do I compare against my peers? You have to be honest with yourself. If you know you're good at that, then you can actually reasonably demand the right outcome for you. But I think you also have to be realistic about saying, would that make me happy? What do I want? Whether it's an upgrade to your car, does it really change your life? Does that car? I mean, it's prestige. You pull up there. You're constantly worrying about somebody scratching the car or you scratching the car when you get out and bump into the car, which is perhaps even more valuable next to you that you banged into. It's a bit like that thing where after your car gets the first scratch, you're suddenly relieved. You're angry for a bit, don't get me wrong. You just, oh my God, I can't believe I did that to my own car. But then once it's happened, you're like, well,
it's just another car.
It's just a scratch. It's just a car. And it's not even going to affect the resale value. It's how old now or what have you. Yeah. So I think you have to honestly accept yourself. What are these things worth in your life? Yeah. And are these the things that matter? And I think a lot of that changes with family. When you get family, then you have an obligation to look after them. And then you start to worry about those things again. But while you don't have family, I'd recommend sort of just trying to experiment with things. Do all those experiments you need to practice being confident, practice being, maybe asking for different things that you really care about, but you think people won't respect if you ask for. I don't know if there's a thing like that in your career. It might be like, I want to leave at 5:30 so I can go watch my football match, or I want to go practice, piano in the evenings, or go look at art, or whatever it is what you want to do. Be honest with yourself. That's what would make you happy. That'll be so much more pleasant than getting an upgrade to your car and having a slightly shinier car for a while until you scratch it. Yeah. And then you think, oh, back to the same old scratched car again. So I think if you're honest with yourself, it makes so much difference. And I think status is a bit of a thing for Asian culture. I know in Singapore and in Hong Kong, there's a lot of pressure there to have a job like accountancy or doctor or law or one of those sort of prestigious careers. I actually think nowadays a lot of that's changing anyway. People are being much more realistic about what they want, and people are able to have creative careers, and they're able to have maybe very different types of careers that weren't even careers before. So yeah.
Let's say I've found out my why, and
well done.
Thank you. And because my fear is communicating that to my boss.
Oh yeah.
Now you are the boss of many people here. So if, for instance, let's say making things up, I want to go down to 4 days a week.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask my boss, but I'm afraid of what he or she might say. From the boss's perspective,
yeah.
Is that something I should be afraid of? Or can I just come openly to you and say, do you know what? I want a pay rise. I want 4 days a week.
Most bosses will think reasonably logically about this. So they'll think about this as in, fine, you want to cut your salary. That's probably acceptable. If they're too quick on that one, you're probably in trouble. You need to try a little bit harder. But if they're not, if they're thinking about it and they say, okay, that's fair enough, that's going to be a reduction in salary, you need to come to them with that beforehand so that you demonstrate you understood their position on this. because at the end of the day, business is business. And if you say to them the right things, like, I will do this, I will do that, and I expect this in return, then they'll probably say, okay, that's reasonable. You've thought it through. I'm not happy because I like working with you. I'm not happy that I'm losing 20% of you and might have to hire a 20% more from something else, or an average, a new graduate or something to help offset some of that. But mostly, I think in this day and age, people are much more willing to consider that. And the worst thing you can do is not talk to your boss about that. Because if you've never discussed it, how do you know what they think? And if you've never proposed some sort of compromise, the answer is no. No, you can't have it. You can't have less work and still expect to be paid the same. Why would you? Yeah. But if you go in there honestly understanding the situation and say, yeah, I'm willing to take a pay cut and I'll be willing to take up to this. Obviously, you've got to think a little bit of negotiation and hold back a little bit if you need to compromise. If they come back with another, demand, then you might need to. So you wouldn't go in there with your lowest bid, but you would have to reflect on it and say, I'd be willing to accept a cut in salary to reflect the hours I'm doing less. Okay. And that's not saying, a third. Like, wow, Jan, what are you thinking? Why did you say that? Yeah. You don't have to do that sort of thing. You just have to say, I'd be willing to accept that. Or it might be something else like, to me, watching a football game might mean, I don't watch football. I watched football yesterday. Well done then. For somebody else, that will be the thing. The only thing they care about is on Thursday or whatever, they want to go and watch football, and that means they need to leave the office at 5:30, or it might be something else. I don't know what it is. Like I said, ballet or art or some other cultural thing. I encourage us all to have something outside of work. Yeah. Having a life which is defined by your salary and your occupation seems very, very narrow-minded. And I think if you have that, you're going to find it difficult to appreciate life. And I think having something outside and being authentically you is something you can bring into that conversation later on when you are at work and describe it. And they'll say, oh, I thought you were Asian. I didn't think you had any interest in, ballet or something like that. That seems very Western or whatever. I don't know. But it'll allow other people to understand that you're a human being and we all have interests from a wide variety of different backgrounds and different sort of obsessions and interests and what have you. So I think bringing that is useful. And if you hide that from yourself and you try and behave like a professional, that's sad, because then you're not opening up to your colleagues at work. You're not being you. And I think building a bond between you and your colleagues is much, much more easy if you can have that sort of conversation. But nevertheless, back to the original story, which is if something means something to you, if something's important to you, you've got to defend that. You've got to be willing to talk about that and come up with a compromise so that you can have that. And then you'll have a much more rich life. Okay. You'll have one of interest.
So I guess sort of two takeaways for me then is, if I know what I want, don't be afraid to ask for it, because at the end of the day, your boss is still a person and is willing to negotiate and is understanding, because chances are you've probably been through, you have been through
multiple
the same
times, yeah.
Growing up or going through your career.
Yeah, and it's the same whether it's something about maybe university or school or something else. There's all sorts of compromises we can make in our lives, and we just need to be prepared to go out there and ask the question. Yeah. And we also need to reflect on the fact that somebody else is going to have a different opinion. We need to reflect on their opinion and think, what do they want to get out of this? Mm-hmm. And am I being fair to them? And if you're being fair, then that seems reasonable. And if they're not, they're being unreasonable, then maybe you're in the wrong place.
Because I always think, what is reasonable to me? Is it a lower bar? Because being Asian, I always feel like, some people might feel like, do you know what, I'm almost living on borrowed land. My parents are immigrants. I'm living in someone else's world. And maybe I don't deserve this as much.
Don't ever think that. That'd be awful. You can't think because of geography that, nobody has any right to this square foot of land or what have you. You mustn't ever think that I'm on somebody else's turf. Yeah. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. And I've traveled all over the world. That's one thing I can say for sure, is I've been everywhere. And if you ever treat yourself as an immigrant to the extent where you're embarrassed, then, you're never going to have the chance to equalize that, to be able to see others on a peer level. And you have to. Otherwise, you're going to live an awkward life, should we call it that? You'll always be uncomfortable. And that's That's that veneer I talked about at the very beginning of perfection. The attempt to be perfect all the time is exhausting. And the more you can be yourself and relate to other people as you, the easier it is for you to think, because you're not second guessing everything every time. And the more confident you can be just to ask for what you want, or just tell them what you want and allow them to come to a decision. You can say something like, to your boss or your line manager or the person who hired you or whatever, that you were interested in this and you're really enthusiastic about it. They might even come to you with have you ever thought about taking 4 days? Because we'd be interested in reducing down our overall salary cost this year, and frankly business hasn't been that great, and the last thing we want to do is fire anybody, so we're looking for ways to cut costs. They might even come to you with that, but unless you have that conversation with somebody where they feel comfortable talking to you and you feel comfortable talking to them, then you'll never really know.
So those are my 2 original takeaways, and the third is never downplay yourself.
Never.
Never think that, do you know what, like, I'm on borrowed land, or I'm an imposter, I don't belong here.
Yeah.
Know what you want, fight for what you want, and ask for what you want, because you deserve it.
Yeah, be careful on the fighting. I'm talking about weapons and things like that in the sort of like psychological sense, but obviously I don't mean anything like that. What I mean is tools in your armory, or again, going back to the weapons thing. I'm not quite sure what the word is, but there's something about having the tools there and having practiced them. Yeah. And you've got to practice them at silly things like, I don't know, maybe you've got some society or team or something that you're into outside of work, like you're playing, I don't know, frisbee or table tennis or whatever it is, and there's some sort of society there or group or team. You want to practice getting out of position and into a new position, because it's harmless. It doesn't mean anything. And it gives you a chance to practice that. It builds up your confidence and allows you to be the leader once in a while. If you've never practiced being the leader, it's very uncomfortable. And when somebody assigns you to be the leader, you're really out of your depth or whatever. Whereas if you've been always the leader in every single community thing you've done, or hobby or society or whatever it is that you've done outside of university or school or work, then you'll naturally come into it. And people often say, that chap looks so confident. Or well, unfortunately, it's normally the guy as well, isn't it? That's terrible, but it's true. Men see this as easier to be confident because often they'll assert that confidence and they'll be the leader in a group when there's a balance, because they've always seen male leaders in groups. Same as, maybe we see more white leaders in groups. So it's always easier to have been assigned that role. Just like if you look at footballers, most of them are born in September, because the older kids are able to be that much bigger, and they get chosen every time. They keep getting chosen. That's what makes success. It's not about being naturally fitter and healthier and all that stuff. It's about being bigger at the point when you had to be chosen. So you got that chance to gain the experience. And the same thing is true about everything in life. The more you can put yourself out there, get that experience, put yourself out of your comfort zone and practice it, you're definitely going to get more experience, more confidence. You'll be more confident when you need it.